My brother called me on a Tuesday morning while I was watching my father do his crossword puzzle on the back porch of our rented cottage in Sarasota. The ocean breeze was coming in soft through the screen door. Dad had just asked me to pass the orange juice, and I was standing up from the wicker chair when my phone lit up with my brother's name. I almost didn't answer. We hadn't spoken in 3 months, not since the argument at Christmas where he told me I was selfish for moving out of state and leaving Dad alone. I stared at his name on the screen for 4 full rings. Then I picked up. He wasn't crying. That was the first thing I noticed. His voice was flat, rehearsed, the way people sound when they've practiced a script so many times they've forgotten what genuine emotion feels like. "It's Dad," he said. "He had a massive stroke 2 nights ago. He's in a memory care facility now. It happened fast. He barely knows where he is." I turned to look at my father through the screen door. He was frowning at 7 across, tapping his pen against the paper. He was wearing the blue linen shirt I'd bought him for his birthday. He looked completely fine. "He already signed the updated will while he was still lucid," my brother continued, his voice dropping into something that was meant to sound gentle but landed as smug. "He left the house and all his accounts to me. He said you've been distant. He said it was what he wanted. I'm sorry, Maya. There's nothing left for you." I sat back down in the wicker chair very slowly. I put the phone on speaker and set it on the armrest. My father looked up from his crossword and raised an eyebrow at me. "Everything okay?" he asked. I held one finger to my lips. He looked at the phone, then back at me, then set down his pen. "So there's no point in you coming home," my brother said. "The estate is being handled. The house goes on the market next week. I just thought you deserved to know." I looked at my father. He was leaning forward in his chair now, listening. I watched the color shift in his face as he understood what was happening. His jaw tightened. He didn't say a word. He just folded his hands on the table and waited. "Thank you for calling," I said, keeping my voice even. "I appreciate you letting me know." "I knew you'd be reasonable about this," my brother said, and I could hear the relief in it, the loosening of tension. He thought he had won. He thought I would crumble or rage or plead. He didn't know that the most dangerous thing in the world is a woman who already knows the answer before she asks the question. I hung up. The sound of the ocean filled the porch. Dad picked up his pen again, but he wasn't writing. "He thinks I'm dead," my father said quietly. "Not dead," I said. "Just gone. Irrelevant." The same thing, in his mind. Dad set the pen down and looked at me. He was 68 years old. His hands were steady, his eyes were clear. 3 months ago, he had called me from the emergency room with a minor cardiac event. A warning shot, the doctors said. Not a crisis. My brother had used those 3 days in the hospital to convince Dad to sign a durable power of attorney. He had told Dad it was standard, just paperwork in case things got worse. Dad had been scared. He had signed it. He told me about it afterward. And that phone call was the reason I had driven 14 hours straight from Chicago and moved him out of that house before my brother could use that piece of paper to dismantle everything our family had built. I worked as a legal document analyst for a private consulting firm. I had spent 7 years reviewing wills, contracts, and estate filings for inconsistencies. I knew exactly what my brother was capable of doing with a power of attorney and a scared old man. I also knew that whatever document he had manufactured in the last 72 hours, it would have a flaw. They always had a flaw. I picked up my phone and called my colleague Rachel, who I had worked with for 5 years and who happened to have a law degree and absolutely no patience for fraud. "He made his move," I said when she answered. I heard her keyboard stop. "What do we have?" "A claimed stroke. A new will. The house is already listed. Where's your dad right now?" Finishing a crossword puzzle and being very annoyed. "Good," Rachel said. "I need you to get a full medical workup today. I need timestamps, cognitive evaluation, blood pressure, everything. I need it to be ironclad." I looked at Dad. He was already writing down the name of the doctor we had seen last week. "Already on it," I said. What I didn't tell Rachel yet, because I was still processing it myself, was what I had found 3 days earlier while reviewing the documents my brother had emailed me about Dad's power of attorney. I had noticed something in the metadata of the attached PDF. The document had been edited 6 weeks after Dad signed it. Someone had gone back in and added language that wasn't there originally. A clause about real estate liquidation. A clause about transfer of investment accounts. The original document gave my brother authority to make medical decisions in an emergency. The doctored version gave him authority over everything. That discovery had been sitting in my files, timed and stamped, waiting for exactly this moment. I spent the next 4 days in Sarasota with Rachel on the phone 6 hours a day. We got Dad a full cognitive evaluation at a clinic with no connection to anyone in our family. The neurologist put it plainly. His brain was functioning at a level she'd typically see in a healthy 50-year-old. She wrote it in her report with language that left no room for interpretation. While she was writing, Dad was in the waiting room beating a 40-year-old accountant at the lobby's chess setup. Rachel found the listing for Dad's house. It had gone active the same morning my brother called me, which meant the paperwork had been filed at least 2 days before that call. He hadn't listed the house after Dad had his so-called stroke. He had listed the house and then invented the stroke to keep me away while the deal closed. On the third night, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open and a cup of cold coffee next to me while Dad slept in the next room. I went through the new will my brother had filed with the county clerk. It was a witness document, signed by 2 people. One of the witness signatures belonged to a notary whose license had lapsed 8 months earlier. The other signature belonged to my brother's wife. A beneficiary's spouse cannot serve as a witness to a will in the state where my father's property was located. It wasn't a technicality. It was a fundamental defect that invalidated the document entirely. I printed it out. I highlighted the relevant line. I held it up in the lamplight of the rented cottage kitchen and felt the particular clarity that comes when you've been holding your breath for a very long time and finally get to exhale. My brother had scheduled what he was calling a family asset meeting for the following Saturday at a conference room in a downtown law office. He had invited 2 cousins, an uncle, and the family's longtime accountant. He planned to announce the transition of the estate publicly, with witnesses, to make it harder to contest later. He wanted community validation. He wanted the family's blessing on what he had done. I decided to give him an audience. I called Dad into the kitchen and told him everything I had found. He listened without interrupting, which he almost never did. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "She pushed him into this," he said finally. He meant my sister-in-law. "She's been whispering in his ear for 2 years. I watched it happen. I just didn't want to believe my own son would go all along with it." "He went along with it," I said. Dad nodded slowly. "Then we go Saturday. I had one condition. You don't walk in with me. You come in after." He looked at me for a moment, then smiled the way he smiled when I was 12 and solved a puzzle he'd set out for me. "You always did like a good entrance," he said. The conference room on Saturday was beige and corporate and smelled of leather folders. My brother was already there when I arrived, standing near the window with 2 cousins and our uncle, who was shaking his hand with the solemnity of a man at a funeral. My sister-in-law stood slightly behind my brother, holding a leather portfolio and wearing an expression of practiced grief that she hadn't bothered to make convincing. My brother saw me come in and went very still. "Maya," he said. "I didn't think you were coming." "You didn't give me a choice," I said pleasantly. I took a seat at the far end of the table. The family accountant, a man named Gerald who had done our family taxes for 20 years, looked at me with something between relief and discomfort. He hadn't known about this meeting until 2 days ago. He'd told me so himself when I called him Thursday evening to explain what I had found. My brother cleared his throat and moved to the head of the table. My sister-in-law sat beside him and opened her portfolio. She had printed out a summary of the estate assets. She had organized them into columns. She had even brought a pen to sign things with. She was that confident. "I know this is hard for everyone," my brother began, but Dad made his wishes clear before his condition deteriorated. "The will is filed. The house is under contract. We're here today to—" "Can I ask a question?" I said. My brother stopped. His wife looked at me with the expression of someone who has stepped on a nail in the dark. "Which facility is Dad in?" I asked. "I'd like to send flowers." My brother blinked. "He's at Maplewood, in the memory care wing." "That's funny," I said. I opened the folder in front of me and slid a document down the table toward Gerald. "Because I spoke to the director of Maplewood yesterday. They have no patient by the name of Robert Halstead. They never have. I have the letter here if you'd like to read it." The room went very quiet. My brother looked at his wife. She looked at the portfolio. "There must be a mix-up," she said. Her voice was completely steady. I had to admire it. In the way you admire a very good liar for the sheer technical commitment. There might be, I agreed. Gerald, would you like to see the cognitive evaluation I had done on Dad last Thursday? It was conducted at Sarasota Regional Medical by a board-certified neurologist. The timestamp puts it 2 days after the will was supposedly filed. Gerald took the documents I slid to him and put on his reading glasses. The will also has a problem, I continued. I pulled out the highlighted copy and passed it to my uncle. In this state, a beneficiary's spouse cannot legally witness a will. Your signature is online too, I said to my sister-in-law. It voids the document. She looked at the paper. For just a second, something crossed her face that was not an emotion she had planned to show. Maya, my brother said, his voice dropping. You don't understand what we've been dealing with. Dad was confused. He was scared. We were trying to protect. I understand everything, I said. I placed my hand on the table and kept my voice completely level. I also understand that the power of attorney you had Dad sign was altered after the fact. The metadata from the PDF you emailed me last month shows the document was edited 6 weeks after the signing date. The clause about real estate and investment accounts was added in the revision. I have the original, which Dad saved as a screenshot the day he signed it. And I have the timestamp on the edit. My uncle set the document down. He was looking at my brother with an expression I had never seen on his face before. The house listing went live the morning you called me, I said. You told me Dad had his stroke 2 nights ago, but the listing was filed 4 days before that call. You were selling the house before you even invented the stroke. My brother stood up. That's not... The door opened. Dad walked in. He was wearing a charcoal blazer and his good shoes. He had his reading glasses pushed up on top of his head the way he always did when he was about to say something that required precision. He didn't look confused. He didn't look frail. He looked like a man who had been waiting for a long time to say something that needed saying out loud, in front of people who needed to hear it. The 2 cousins both made a sound. My uncle stood up from his chair. Gerald actually took his glasses off and rubbed his eyes. My brother sat back down. The color left his face so quickly it was almost interesting to watch. My sister-in-law closed the portfolio. Dad walked to the table and pulled out the chair next to mine. He sat down and folded his hands. He looked at my brother for a long moment without saying anything. My brother could not hold his gaze. He looked at the table instead. I am not dead, Dad said. I am not in a memory care facility. I do not have dementia. And I did not sign a will leaving you everything. He paused. I did sign a power of attorney that I should never have signed, and I have been sitting in Sarasota for 3 months, with my daughter, while she put together everything you see on this table. He looked at Gerald. Gerald, I want a new estate plan drafted by end of week. Maya is to be named executor. Gerald nodded once. He looked almost relieved. Now, Dad said, turning back to my brother, I want to know about the house. My brother said nothing. His wife said nothing. The room held its breath. The contract is not valid, Rachel said from the doorway. I hadn't heard her come in. She was standing with a briefcase and a very calm face. The seller authorization was signed under a fraudulent power of attorney. I filed a notice with the county this morning to void the transaction. The listing has been suspended. She sat down at the table and set a folder in front of my brother. You'll also want to know that we contacted the original buyer and explained the situation. They're not pursuing the sale. They're pursuing a complaint with the state real estate board against the agent who was handling it, who I believe is your brother-in-law? My sister-in-law's composure finally cracked. It wasn't dramatic. It was small, just a tightening around her mouth and a rapid blink, but I had been watching for it. This is a family matter, my brother said, finding his voice at last. It was smaller than it had been. You can't just bring lawyers into a family matter. You brought the fraud in first, I said. He looked at me then, really looked at me, for the first time since I'd walked in. I had known my brother my whole life. I had shared a bedroom with him until I was 9. I had covered for him when he crashed Dad's car at 17. I had lent him money 3 times that he never paid back and never mentioned. I knew exactly what his face looked like when he was about to blame someone else for something he had done, and I watched him searching for that gear now, looking for the angle, the version of events where he was still the reasonable one. He didn't find it. She pushed me into this, he said finally, and looked at his wife. She looked back at him with an expression so cold it lowered the temperature of the room. Don't, she said quietly. You're the one who found the loophole with the POA. You're the one who called the realtor. I told you it was too fast. I said we should wait. Stop talking, she said. The equity was going to cover the investment losses. You said it was the only way to— Stop talking, she said again, louder. Dad put his hand flat on the table. What investment losses? The silence that followed was the specific kind that comes when a secret bigger than the one you were investigating suddenly surfaces without warning. Rachel opened her briefcase. She had gotten there before me, as it turned out. The financial review she had run on my brother's accounts in the past 48 hours had found something I hadn't been looking for. Over a period of 2 years, a series of transfers had moved money from a joint investment account my brother and father shared into a private brokerage account under my sister-in-law's name alone. The amounts were irregular enough to avoid automated flags. A few thousand here, a few thousand there. 37 transfers in total. The aggregate was just over $240,000. My father looked at the summary Rachel placed in front of him. He read it the way he read everything, slowly and without expression, and when he finished, he set it down and folded his hands again. My brother was staring at his wife. You said those were transfers to the renovation fund. There was no renovation, she said. She wasn't looking at him anymore. The account is in your name. Yes, she said. My brother's face went through several things in quick succession. I actually felt something for him in that moment. Not enough to change anything, but enough to note. He had been willing to steal from our father to save himself, but he hadn't known he was also being robbed by the person he thought was his partner in it. There is a particular kind of justice that doesn't require you to do anything except step back and let people be exactly who they are. 2 days later, my sister-in-law agreed to a full accounting of the transferred funds in exchange for the financial fraud charges being filed as civil rather than criminal, at least initially. Her attorney advised her it was her best option. My brother did not share her attorney. As of that week, he did not have the money to retain one of his own. The criminal complaint that did go forward came from Gerald. He had discovered, while pulling the full estate records at Rachel's request, that my brother had submitted a false document to the county probate office. Filing a fraudulent will with a probate court is a felony, regardless of whether the fraud succeeds. The document had his signature on it. The timestamp matched a period when my father was documentably in Sarasota and documentably alive. He was charged 4 days after the conference room meeting. He called me the night before his arraignment. I was sitting on the porch of Dad's house, which we had driven back to that weekend. The sale pending sign had been taken down. The lock had been changed. The key was on my keychain. My brother's voice on the phone was very different from the voice that had told me my father was dead. It was smaller, cracked in places. He said he was sorry. He said he hadn't been thinking clearly. He said she had convinced him it was the only way, and by the time he understood what he had actually done, it was too late to walk it back. I listened to all of it. I didn't tell him it was okay, because it wasn't. I didn't tell him I forgave him, because I hadn't decided yet. I told him I hoped he would use the time ahead of him to think about what kind of person he wanted to be when it was over. Then I wished him luck and hung up. Dad was inside watching television. I could hear the low murmur of it through the screen door. The neighborhood was quiet, the way it gets in early fall when the summer is finally releasing its grip and the air starts to smell like wood smoke and something unnamed that you associate with being somewhere safe. The months that followed were not simple. Nothing that involves courts and money and broken family trust ever resolves simply. My brother accepted a plea agreement. My sister-in-law settled the civil suit and transferred the $240,000 back in full, along with penalties. The attorney handling the estate on my brother's behalf withdrew from the case once the full picture emerged. Rachel helped me set up an irrevocable trust for Dad's property. It was the kind of structure that doesn't allow a single person to liquidate or transfer assets without a majority of trustees approving, and the trustees were Dad, me, and Gerald. The house could not be sold without all three of us in agreement. No one could take it from him. The day we signed the trust documents, Dad and I went to dinner at the Italian place 2 blocks from the house where he had taken me every year on my birthday since I was 6. He ordered the same thing he always ordered. He told the waiter it was my birthday even though it wasn't, which embarrassed me and delighted him. The waiter brought a piece of tiramisu with a candle in it, and Dad sang one verse of the song in the off-key baritone that had always mortified me as a child and that I would now consider one of the best sounds in the world. We walked home after. The evening was cool. Dad walked without his cane, which he did when he was feeling good and didn't want to hear any commentary about it. "I want to ask you something," he said when we turned onto our street. "Okay," I said. "When you moved me to Sarasota, when you spent 3 months building that case, did you know how it would end?" "I thought about it honestly. I knew we had enough to win," I said. "I didn't know what winning would cost." He nodded. He didn't say anything else about it. He had a way of accepting complicated answers that I had never fully appreciated until I got older. There was a letter in the mailbox when we got home. No return address. I recognized the handwriting. Dad saw it too. He looked at it, then at me, then went inside without a word. He trusted me to handle it. My brother's handwriting had always been large and slightly tilted to the right, the handwriting of someone who never learned to slow down. The letter was 2 pages, both sides. I stood under the porch light and read it. He wrote about our childhood. He wrote about the year after our mother died when everything fell apart and then slowly came back together. He wrote about the fear he had felt watching Dad in the hospital, and how that fear had made him stupid and pliable in the hands of someone who was already looking for a way to use it. He wrote that he understood there was no version of what he had done that was acceptable, and that he wasn't asking me to tell him otherwise. He wrote that he hoped, eventually, I would let him try to be better. He didn't ask for anything. Not money, not advocacy, not a visit. Just the possibility of eventually. I read it twice. I folded it and put it in my jacket pocket. I went inside and found Dad asleep in his armchair with the television on low. I turned it off and put a blanket over him and went to the kitchen to make tea. The house was warm. The floors were the same floors they had always been, a little creaky near the back hallway, solid everywhere else. The photographs on the windowsill were the same photographs. Nothing had been moved or sold or replaced. I thought about my brother's letter. I thought about what it would mean to eventually let someone try again, and what it would mean not to, and how much of that decision was about justice, and how much was about something simpler, which was that people you love can become people who hurt you, and the hardest thing in the world is to hold both of those facts at the same time without letting one erase the other. I didn't have an answer that night. That was all right. Some questions earn the right to take time. What I knew was this: Dad was safe. The house was safe. The trust that held it had been designed to outlast both of us. Whatever came next, no one could walk in from the outside and dismantle what we had built by lying to a scared man in a hospital bed. The kettle began to hiss. I poured the water and stood at the kitchen window looking out at the yard. The tree Dad had planted the year I was born had grown so tall you couldn't see the top from inside anymore. I thought about the fact that he had planted it knowing he wouldn't live to see it fully grown, and that he had done it anyway, because some things you do for the person who comes after you. I picked up my cup. The warmth came through the ceramic into my palms. I had moved home 3 months ago to protect my father. I had thought it was temporary. Standing in that kitchen, in that house, with its creaky floor and its tall tree and its photographs of people who were gone and people who were still here, I understood that home was not a place you left and returned to. It was the thing you fought to keep exactly as stubbornly and as quietly as necessary, for as long as it took, and then you stayed inside it, and were grateful. That was the whole story. That was all of it. Sometimes the best thing you can say at the end of a fight is not that you won, but that when it was over, you still recognized yourself in the mirror. I was still the same person I had been the morning my brother called. I had not become cruel. I had not become my worst fear. I had just done the work, protected what mattered, and come home. Dad's voice came from the living room, sleepy and slightly indignant. "Did you turn off my program?" "Yes," I said. "I was watching that. You were asleep." A pause. I was resting my eyes. I smiled into my tea. "There's a new episode tomorrow," I said. Another pause. "Fine," he said. I heard him adjust in his chair. I heard the soft sound of him settling. I stood in the kitchen a little longer, not because I had anywhere to be, but because some moments deserve the time it takes to fully arrive inside them. If you have ever had to fight for your family against the people you thought you could trust, you know exactly what I mean. Like and subscribe for more stories of justice. And if this one touched you, Leave a comment. I read every single one.